Hello, I'd like to welcome you back to another Bio 101 lecture. And once again, this is Dr. Joe, and today we are going to be talking about cell anatomy and physiology. Believe it or not, we have not known about cells for all that long. We only learned about cells in the 1600s when the first crude microscope was developed, and the inventor began looking at various things in the world around him. What he saw in the water, in the dirt, and even on his body were small beasties inhabiting an unseen world. Now we know that these are one-celled and multi-celled organisms, and that even our bodies are made up of cells that work together to maintain life. So let's look at some common components, functions, and characteristics of the cells around us. As varied as cells can be, there are three common components to all cells: a plasma membrane, cytoplasma, and DNA. The cell's plasma membrane is the outermost part of the cell that separates it from the external environment. This membrane is permeable to some things but not to others, and is called selectively permeable. This membrane is what controls all of the exchange between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell. Inside of the plasma membrane is a jelly-like substance called cytoplasm that consists of water, sugars, ions, and proteins. This is also where all of the internal structures of the cell are located. These structures, or organelles, are what are responsible for carrying out the functions of the cell. The last common component of the cell is DNA, which contains the blueprint for the entire organism. In some cases, such as bacteria or archaea, or single-celled organisms with no nucleus, the DNA is just kind of floating around in the cytoplasm. All of the eukaryotic organisms, or organisms whose cells have a nucleus, have the DNA located in the nucleus. Eukaryotes are all of the protista, fungi, plants, and animals. And these can either be single-celled organisms or multi-celled organisms, but they all have nucleated cells or cells with a nucleus. Now, another interesting factoid about cells is that they are small. Well, why is this the case? Why can't we just have really, really big cells? Well, cells have to exchange substances with the world around them at a pace that will keep up with metabolism inside the cell. Bigger cells would need a higher metabolism, so if the cell gets too big, then there wouldn't be enough nutrient exchange across the cell membrane to support the cell's function, and the cell will die. Therefore, cells are small. I mean, they're really tiny, actually. Okay, cells are only about 10 to 20 micrometers in diameter, which is about 50 times smaller than we can see with the naked eye. A single micrometer or micrometer is a thousandth of a millimeter, which to us seems pretty small. So to see cells, we need a microscope. Light microscopes use visible light to illuminate samples. Photographs of what we see in a microscope are called micrographs. For the most part, cells are transparent, so their internal detail are often not visible until they are stained. This staining increases contrast between cell structure or even between different types of cells. This staining can be used as a diagnostic tool for identifying the causes of some diseases. Another tool that scientists will use when looking at cells are light-emitting tracers. And these tracers will illuminate when they are hit by a laser. These cells or structures can then be seen with a fluorescent microscope. Other microscopes, such as transmission electron microscopes or electron scanning microscopes, can be used to see even small structures or finer detail. Another common part of cells are the cell membranes, or the thing that separates the inside of the cell from the outside of the cell. And these cell membranes are more than just a barrier or a wall that separates the two. Think of it as a wall with a door and a doorman, and the doorman only opens the door for things that he wants to let in. And those things that he wants to let in are the things that are necessary to keep the cells alive or to perform other functions. Almost all cells are constructed of a lipid bilayer consisting of 2 fatty acid tails and 2 fatty acid heads, with the tails touching each other. But there are also other molecules such as cholesterol, proteins, glycoproteins, and glycolipids, which are all embedded in this lipid bilayer. This layer is often described as a fluid mosaic because it will behave like a two-dimensional liquid with a mixed and changing composition. This cell layer is considered fluid because they are not chemically bonded to one another like the molecules they are composed of. A cell's membrane will differ from those of other cells depending upon its unique composition. For example, if a membrane has a high cholesterol content, then its fluidity can decrease. The fluidity of cell membrane also depends upon the length and saturation of this phospholipid fatty acid tail that the layer is made of. Archaea do not use fatty acids to build their phospholipids, but rather they use reactive side chains which form rigid cross-linking with each other, which makes the plasma membrane of Archaea stiffer than those of bacteria or eukaryotes. There are also many types of proteins associated with a cell membrane. Some of these are permanently attached to a lipid bilayer, while others are only temporarily attached. Each of these proteins impart a specific function to the layer. Some of these proteins, called adhesion proteins, allow some cells to adhere together to form tissue. Recognition proteins in the plasma membrane allows the body's cells to recognize itself to prevent an immune response from affecting its own cells. There are also some types of proteins called transport proteins that move specific substances across the cell membrane. These are those doormen we talked about earlier. The proteins are especially important because this is how most substances, such as the energy-containing molecules, get through to provide the nutrients to the cells that the cells need. So, you can see there's even though there's a lot of cells in the world, there's a lot of common components. The cell membrane, them being small, and the organelles and other parts of the cell that basically make a cell. But what you're going to find is even what seem to be fairly simple cells can bind together to form very complex organisms, ranging from plants to us.